This marriage has served its purpose. Who belongs in this room now?
You're making me kneel before her?
The investment is over. Thank the family and leave.
Kemi Adeyemi had 30 seconds. That's what the voice on the phone told her. 30 seconds to explain why a car with tinted windows had been parked outside her daughter's preschool for 2 mornings in a row. She didn't have an answer. She had a name, and the name was enough. Before this moment, before any of it, let me ask you something. How many of us have built an entire life around one rule? Never let him find you, only to realize the rule was never really about hiding. It was about healing. And healing, real healing, doesn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, it walks into a room and gets recognized. If you're watching this from your kitchen tonight, folding laundry, on a night shift break, driving home from work with nowhere else to be, settle in. This one's going to sit with you. Her name was Kemi. This is the story of how a man who once made her kneel on marble in front of the woman, replacing her, spent 2 years learning what it costs to lose everything that mattered, one piece at a time, while 3 children, who share his face, grew up calling another man their father. But let's go back. Let's start where Kemi always insisted on starting, not with the wedding, not with the ring, but with the girl who believed people meant what they said. She was 26 when she landed in Seoul, a nursing fellowship in one hand and a suitcase that weighed more than her savings account in the other. She'd grown up in Houston, watching her mother work double shifts, and promise herself, out loud, in the mirror, that she would never build a life on somebody else's exhaustion. She wanted partnership. She wanted a man who noticed when she was tired, before she said it. For 8 months, Kang Do-hyun looked exactly like that man. He didn't tell her what he did for a living, not at first, and she didn't push. He said logistics, the way some men say, "I'll call you." Technically true, deliberately incomplete. She noticed the security detail before she understood it. She noticed the way rooms changed temperature when he walked into them, before she understood that too. But he remembered her coffee order after one visit. He sat with her through a 12-hour shift when her patient died on the table and she couldn't stop replaying it. For a woman who'd spent her whole life being the one who held things together, being held felt like a foreign language she was finally learning to speak. She married him 11 months after they met. Her mother flew in from Houston and cried through the whole ceremony, and Kemi remembers thinking, this is what it feels like when it's real. She was wrong, but she wouldn't know how wrong for 2 more years. Here's what she didn't know yet. Sitting in that hanbok on her wedding day, believing she'd found her partner, the man she married didn't marry her because he loved her. Not only, he married her because a foreign wife asked fewer questions, drew less suspicion, and gave him something that looked, from the outside, like softness. She was armor he could wear in public. She found that out the night she was 11 weeks pregnant, kneeling on a marble floor in front of his entire family, in front of a woman named Yoo Ji-soo who stood there, in Kemi's own living room wearing perfume Kemi had never smelled before, while Do-hyun told her, in front of everyone, that the marriage had run its course. He never asked if she was pregnant. He never gave her the chance to say it. She didn't cry that night. Not once. Not until she was 3 hours south, in a bus terminal in Busan, alone, holding a duffel bag and a phone she was about to throw into the Nakdong River. Now do the math with me. 2 years ago, on a marble floor in Gangnam, Kang Do-hyun ended a marriage he thought was already broken. What he didn't know was that he hadn't ended anything. He'd started something. Because 11 weeks pregnant became full term, and full term became triplets, delivered alone, in a birthing clinic 3 hours from the man who fathered them, and raised since day one by a woman who decided that surviving wasn't enough. She was going to build something unshakable. And 2 years later, in a hospital charity gala, neither of them was supposed to attend, Kang Do-hyun would come face to face with 3 children who had his jaw, his exact stubborn chin, and his mother's sharp eyes. Children who, when they saw him standing there, ran straight past him toward an old fisherman sitting at the edge of the room, calling out the same word, over and over. Papa, he wasn't ready for what that word would do to him. If you're already invested, subscribe and stay with me, because this story is not going where you think it's going. The real question isn't whether Kemi ever forgives him. She already knows the answer to that. The real question is what a man does when he realizes the empire he spent his whole life building was never the thing worth protecting, and whether it's already too late to protect the one thing that was. Kemi used to say faith was cheap and trust was expensive, and she'd learned the difference the hard way long before she ever set foot in Korea. But when she met Do-hyun, she let herself spend some of that trust anyway, because he made it feel like a good investment. He was 31 when they met, already running 3 floors of a building nobody in Gangnam asked questions about. His family had been in trade and logistics for 2 generations, which was the phrase his grandfather used, and the phrase Do-hyun inherited along with everything underneath it. He didn't grow up soft. His father left when Do-hyun was 9. Not dramatically, just gone one Tuesday, and his mother raised him inside an organization that taught him one lesson early and often. The moment you need someone, they become a weapon someone else can use against you. So he didn't need people. He collected them. Kemi didn't know any of this the first 6 months. She knew a man who showed up. He learned that she took her coffee black with 1 sugar only, on days she'd worked a trauma shift, and plain black every other day, and he never once got it wrong. He sat outside her apartment for 4 hours once, in the rain, because she mentioned offhand that she hated coming home to an empty building at night, and he didn't tell her he was there. She found out from her neighbor. She married a man who showed up. She just didn't know the version of him that showed up for her was curated, the way a storefront window is curated. Real materials, real craftsmanship, arranged specifically to make you walk through the door. The woman who unraveled it all had a name long before Kemi ever learned it. Yoo Ji-soo had been circling Do-hyun's world since she was 22. The daughter of a man who owed the Kang organization a debt he could never repay in money, so he repaid it in proximity. He put his daughter in rooms Do-hyun walked through. It worked slowly. It worked the way water works on stone. By the time Kemi had been married 18 months, Ji-soo had made herself indispensable to Do-hyun's mother, indispensable to his second-in-command, indispensable to every room that mattered, except the one Kemi lived in. Kemi noticed things. She wasn't naive in the way people like to imagine naive women are. She noticed the new assistant who always seemed to be in the elevator with her husband. She noticed dinners that ran long. She noticed the particular way Do-hyun's mother started referring to Ji-soo as reliable in front of guests. The way families audition a replacement before anyone officially quits the role. She asked him once, directly, over dinner, "Is something going on with Ji-soo?" He didn't lie. That was the worst part looking back. He didn't lie. He just looked at her and said, "Don't ask me questions you don't actually want answered," and changed the subject. And she let him, because that's what 11 months of falling in love teaches you to do. You learn which doors not to knock on. She found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday in March. She bought a card for him, the kind with a stupid pun about the family growing, and she never got to give it to him, because that same week, Do-hyun's mother called a family dinner and told Kemi, without asking, to dress formally. She thought it was a celebration. She wore the deep green dress he'd once told her he loved. She was wrong about what kind of night it was going to be. 20 people sat around that table. Jisoo sat at the end, closest to Do-hyun's mother, which Kemi understood immediately meant something, the way you understand weather changing in your knees before the sky admits it. Do-hyun stood to make an announcement, and for one full second, Kemi let herself believe it might be about the baby she hadn't told him about yet. It wasn't. He said the marriage had served its purpose. He said it the way he might describe a contract expiring. He said Kemi had been a good wife, which she has never once in 2 years since been able to explain to anyone why that particular sentence hurt worse than everything after it. And then his mother, in front of the entire table, told Kemi to kneel and thank the family for the time she'd been given. Kemi has told this part of the story exactly twice in 2 years. Once to a hospital counselor she saw for 6 sessions before she stopped going, and once to Elder Beck, on a night when the triplets were finally asleep, and the silence in the apartment got too loud to sit inside of alone. She knelt. She doesn't fully know why. Some combination of shock and a lifetime of being told good women don't make scenes. She knelt on that marble floor with a baby she hadn't announced yet, growing inside her, in front of the woman who was about to take her place, and she looked up once, just once, at her husband's face, waiting for him to stop it. He didn't stop it. He watched. That's the moment. Not the affair. Not the announcement. Not even the humiliation itself. The moment Kemi Adeyemi's entire understanding of love died was the moment she looked up and watched a man choose to do nothing, while people he called family made her small on purpose. She left the table without a word. She packed one bag that night. She didn't tell him about the baby, because somewhere between the dining room and the front door, she made a decision that would define the next 2 years of her life. He does not get to know. Not because she wanted to punish him, because she understood, with a clarity that surprised even her, that a child born into that room would never be safe from what that room valued. She took a bus to Busan the next morning. She had $1,100, a nursing license, and a phone she threw into the Nakdong River from the Gwangan Bridge 2 weeks later, watching it disappear without ceremony. She didn't cry on that bridge. She'd already done all her crying in a bus terminal bathroom the night before. What she felt on the bridge was something closer to a door closing, and underneath the grief, something she wasn't ready to name yet: relief. Elder Baek Sung-ho found her 3 days after that, though found makes it sound more dramatic than it was. He owned the building where she'd rented a room above a shuttered tackle shop, a fisherman who'd retired from the sea a decade earlier and never quite figured out what to do with the quiet that followed. His wife had died 6 years before, and his only daughter lived in Canada and called twice a year. He noticed the new tenant crying through the wall some nights, and he didn't do anything dramatic about it. He just started leaving food outside her door. Rice, mostly. Sometimes fish he'd cooked too much of on purpose. She was 7 months pregnant before she told him there were 3. She remembers his exact reaction, because it wasn't shock, it was practicality. He said, "Then you'll need 3 of everything," and started building, that same week, 3 small drawers into an old dresser he had no other use for. He drove her to the birthing clinic in Chungju when her body told her it was time, 4 hours away by choice, because Kemi wanted the birth registered somewhere, with no paper trail leading back towards Seoul. He sat in the waiting room for 11 hours. When it was over, when 3 healthy, screaming, furious children had entered the world without their biological father in the room, Elder Bake was the first man who ever held them. He wasn't trying to become their father. He'll tell you that himself, if you ask him. He was just a lonely old man who kept showing up, and showing up, and showing up, until one day a 2-year-old boy named Junho looked up at him mid-tantrum and said "Papa" instead of crying, and neither of them corrected it, and it just became true. Kemi named the other 2 Toby and Ayo after her own grandmother, a woman back in Lagos who used to say that joy, Ayo, is the only inheritance nobody can take from you if you refuse to let them. She went back to nursing 8 months after the triplets were born, part-time first, then full at the community clinic, 2 blocks from their apartment. She built a life with the precision of a woman, assembling a shelter she never intended to leave. She paid cash for the first year. She never posted a photo online with a visible landmark behind it. She told exactly 4 people her real story, and 3 of them were doctors bound by confidentiality. She slept, eventually. She laughed, eventually. Not the performance of laughing she'd learned to do at Kang family dinners, but the real kind, usually provoked by Toby's stubbornness, or Ayo's total lack of fear, or Junho narrating his own life out loud, in a running commentary that made Elder Bake wheeze with laughter every single time. She built, brick by brick, exactly the kind of life she'd once believed marriage would give her. She just built it without a husband, in a city 3 hours from the man who fathered her children, with an old fisherman as the only father figure any of them had ever known. While Kemi was learning to sleep through the night again, Do-hyun was learning something else entirely, that an empire built to make him untouchable had made him, somehow, unreachable, even to himself. The 2 years after Kemi disappeared were the most profitable of his career. He expanded into 3 new districts. He absorbed a rival organization's shipping routes without firing a single shot, through leverage and patience alone, the 2 tools he trusted more than people. His mother finally stopped speaking of the marriage as a mistake and started speaking of it as a lesson learned. And Jisoo, exactly as planned, exactly as engineered, from the day her father first sent her into rooms she didn't belong in, became something close to a wife, in every capacity except the legal one. But Do-hyun noticed something he didn't have language for at first. Success stopped feeling like anything. He'd close a deal that would have made him euphoric 5 years earlier, and he'd sit in his office afterward, and there would just be silence where satisfaction used to live. He never looked for Kemi. He told himself this, constantly, the way people tell themselves things they're trying to make true, through repetition. He never hired anyone to track her, never asked his network to search. Some small, stubborn part of him understood that if he found her, he'd have to face what he did, and facing it meant admitting the marble floor had cost him something he couldn't buy back. Jisoo, for her part, spent those 2 years building her own case for permanence. She learned Do-hyun's mother's recipes. She learned which business partners needed flattery and which needed silence. She was good at the job, because that's what it was, a job, even if she'd started to believe her own performance somewhere in the 2nd year. She got pregnant in her 24th month with the family, and for the first time in her adult life, she let herself imagine a version of her future that didn't require constant vigilance. That imagined future had one flaw she hadn't accounted for. Do-hyun had a wife before her whose disappearance had never been fully explained, and family businesses like the Kang organization inherit through bloodlines, not through whoever manages to stay closest the longest. Jisoo didn't know Kemi was pregnant when she left. Nobody did. But rumors move through organizations like the Kang family, the way infection moves through a body, quietly, then all at once. 6 months into her own pregnancy, Jisoo heard a fragment of conversation between two lieutenants she wasn't supposed to overhear. Something about the nurse and loose ends and a hospital record somebody had flagged in Cheongju 3 years back that nobody had ever fully investigated. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, calculating, the way she'd been trained to calculate since she was 22 years old, and her father first explained what she owed, and to whom. If Kemi had a child, if Kemi had children, plural, the rumor said, though Jisoo dismissed that part as exaggeration, then Jisoo's unborn baby wasn't Do-hyun's only heir. And in a world like this one, only heir was the entire foundation her future rested on. She hired someone the next week, not officially, through a cousin who knew a private investigator who did work nobody asked too many questions about. She wanted one thing confirmed. Was Kemi Adeyemi still alive? And if so, was there a child? She got her answer 4 weeks later, and it wasn't one child, it was 3. The charity gala happened by accident, the way most collisions in this story do. Seoul National Children's Hospital held an annual fundraiser, and Kemi's clinic in Busan had partnered with them that year on a pediatric outreach grant, which meant Kemi, reluctantly, because she hated events like this, hated rooms full of people performing generosity for photographs, had been asked to attend and speak briefly about community health access. She almost said no. Elder Baek talked her into it. "You built something worth being proud of," he told her. "Let them see it." He offered to bring the children along, since the gala had a small daytime portion with a children's area before the evening program, and Kemi, exhausted and flattered, and a little bit proud despite herself, said yes. Do-hyun attended, because his organization had quietly funded a wing of the same hospital years earlier, one of dozens of legitimate businesses laundered through genuine goodwill, and his presence at events like this had become expected, almost ceremonial. He didn't want to be there. He rarely wanted to be anywhere anymore. He was crossing the atrium toward the donor reception when he heard a sound that stopped him completely. 3 small voices, arguing, in that specific overlapping cadence that only identical siblings develop, about who got the last strawberry from a fruit tray. He didn't know why he turned. Something in him turned before his mind gave the order. 3 children stood near a low table meant for the hospital's youngest patients, 2 boys and a girl, and even from 30 feet away, even before he could make out a single feature clearly, something in his chest recognized them before his eyes did. He got closer. He shouldn't have. Every instinct that had kept him alive for 15 years in his line of work told him to keep walking, and he ignored every one of them. The girl saw him first. She didn't recognize him. How could she? But children have a way of clocking adults who are staring, and she stared back with an expression so unmistakably his own mother's, so precisely the look Do-hyun's mother gave people she found mildly amusing, that his breath actually caught. Then Elder Baek walked up behind them, carrying a tray of juice boxes, and all 3 children turned at once and shouted, nearly in unison, "Papa!" Do-hyun has replayed that word 100 times since, not because it hurt to hear children call another man father, though it did, but because of how easily it came out of them. No hesitation, no performance. It was simply true to them, the most natural word in their vocabulary. And Do-hyun, understood in that instant that he was looking at a family that had already finished forming completely, without him, and had never once felt his absence as a wound, because they'd never known him as anything at all. He looked past them and found Kemi standing near the registration table, laughing at something a hospital coordinator said, dressed simply, her posture nothing like the woman who had knelt on his mother's floor 2 years earlier. She looked, from 30 feet away, like a woman who had never needed him. That was the moment his second-in-command, Director Oh Se-jin, found him standing frozen in the middle of the atrium and said, quietly, "Sir, we should go." "Those are my children," Do-hyun said. He wasn't asking. Oh Se-jin followed his gaze and understood immediately. He'd been with Do-hyun 11 years. He'd never once heard that particular tone in his employer's voice. Not fear, not anger. Something closer to a man watching a building he'd already condemned suddenly catch fire from the inside. Kemi saw him at almost the same moment. Their eyes met across the atrium, and something passed between them that neither of them would fully describe to another living person for months afterward. Not fear exactly, not even anger. Recognition of a debt neither of them had figured out how to collect or pay. She didn't run. She wanted to. Instead, she walked directly to Elder Baek, took Io's hand, and said something low and calm to all 3 children about needing to leave a little early. She didn't look at Do-hyun again. She didn't need to. She'd survived worse than his eyes on her back. He didn't follow her. He stood in that atrium for 4 full minutes after she left, and Director Oh Se-jin, watching his employer's face carefully, understood something was about to change that no amount of leverage or money would be able to undo. He built the security perimeter within a week, the same reflex Kemi had once predicted about him without ever articulating it, because she understood, better than anyone, that Do-hyun didn't know how to love something without also trying to control it. 3 men, former special forces, rotating in shifts around Kemi's Busan apartment block, invisible, professional, meant to protect without revealing themselves. Kemi found out within days. A mother learns to read the texture of a neighborhood the way a nurse learns to read vitals, and she clocked the same unfamiliar car parked at 3 different angles across 2 weeks. The same man who appeared to walk past the school at pickup time with no visible reason to be there. She didn't panic. She'd survived 2 years by refusing to panic. She called the one emergency contact she'd kept from her old life, an assistant of Do-hyun's mother, who had quietly slipped Kemi her private number the night of the humiliation, out of what Kemi still believes was genuine shame at what she'd witnessed. Through that contact, a meeting was arranged, not with Do-hyun, but with Director Oh Se-jin, at a small cafe Kemi chose specifically because it had no history attached to either of their lives. She laid out her terms with the same steadiness she used delivering bad news to families in the trauma ward. No surveillance, no presence near the children's school, clinic visits, or home. If he wanted proof his children were safe, she would provide it. Quarterly photographs and updates, delivered through Oh Se-jin, nothing more. The moment she detected a single operative within any reasonable distance of her children, she would disappear again, completely, and this time make certain no resource he had could find her. He won't accept boundaries, Oh Se-jin told her, not unkindly. He doesn't have to accept them, Kemi said. He has to respect them. There's a difference, and it's the only lesson I have left to teach him. Oh Se-jin relayed every word. Do-hyun listened in silence, sitting behind the same desk where he'd once signed papers that ended rival organizations, and said nothing for almost a full minute afterward. "Pull the perimeter," he finally said. "Sir, pull it, all of it. She's right." He looked out the window at Seoul below him, the city he'd spent his whole adult life learning to own pieces of. "I don't get to protect what I already destroyed by controlling it again." For the next several months, Do-hyun kept exactly one promise: distance. He received quarterly photographs through Oh Se-jin, and nothing more. He didn't visit Busan. He didn't reach out. He funded, anonymously, through structures so many layers removed from his name that even Kemi's clinic administrators never traced it. New pediatric equipment for the community health center where she worked, and a renovation of the small public park 2 streets from her apartment, the one with the broken slide the triplets loved anyway. He kept a folder, physical, locked in a drawer only he had the key to. Photographs. A notebook where he wrote down every detail Oh Se-jin's reports contained. Junho's habit of narrating everything out loud. Toby's fearlessness. The exact week Io started saying full sentences. He read that notebook more than he read intelligence reports. His employees noticed. Nobody said anything. Jisoo noticed too. 6 months pregnant, exhausted, and increasingly certain that Do-hyun's attention had shifted somewhere she couldn't follow, she started asking questions of her own, quietly at first, then with the particular desperation of a woman who has built her entire adult identity on being indispensable to one man, and is now watching him become preoccupied with someone he'd never even mentioned to her by name. She found the folder. It wasn't hard. She'd learned over years of proximity exactly where Do-hyun kept things he thought were secret. 41 photographs of 3 children who weren't hers. A notebook filled with a level of tenderness she had never once seen him show her, despite carrying his child for 6 months, despite years of being told she was the future of this family. She didn't confront him. That wasn't her instinct. Her instinct, honed since she was 22 years old and sent into a world where survival meant being useful before someone else was to neutralize the threat before it could neutralize her. She contacted the private investigator again, this time with a different assignment. Not confirmation, documentation, financial records, school enrollment, anything that could establish, on paper, a pattern of instability, of danger, of a single mother with 3 children and no legal protections living in the orbit, however distant, of an organized crime figure. She paired that documentation with a family law attorney named Yang Min-suk, a man whose entire practice was built on exactly this kind of leverage, not proving guilt, but manufacturing enough doubt that a family court would have no choice but to intervene. If we can establish that these children are in a household exposed to organized criminal influence, Attorney Yang explained, in a private office 3 floors above a dry cleaner in Yoido, the court doesn't need proof of harm. It needs a credible risk assessment. That alone can trigger a custody review. And a custody review requires disclosure, financial, medical, everything. If Kang Do-hyun is even peripherally connected, that disclosure becomes a legal earthquake. And the mother? Jisoo asked. The mother becomes collateral, Yang said, without apparent discomfort. That's how leverage works. Jisoo told herself this wasn't cruelty. She told herself it was protection, for her own child, for the only future she'd ever been allowed to build. She didn't examine that reasoning too closely, because examining it too closely would have required her to admit she was doing to Kemi's children exactly what had once, in a different configuration, been done to her. The filing went to the Seoul family court under a technically anonymous tip, though the fingerprints, if anyone cared to look closely, led directly back to a phone registered under Attorney Yang's paralegal. At the same time, quietly, a secondary track began. A journalist named Han Ji-woo, freelance, aggressive, and perpetually short on rent, received an anonymous packet containing surveillance photographs of Do-hyun standing outside a public park in Busan, watching 3 unidentified children play. The packet included just enough detail to make the story irresistible and just enough ambiguity to protect whoever sent it. Han Ji-woo didn't need much more than that. 2 days of digging connected the dots the packet was designed to let her find. By the following week, she had a headline drafted and a source willing to go semi-on record. Seoul crime figures' hidden family uncovered. Questions raised over children's safety. The letter reached Kemi on a Tuesday morning while she was making rice porridge, and Toby was narrating, at volume, an entirely fictional battle between his spoon and a blueberry. Government seal, formal language. A welfare inquiry opened regarding 3 minor children, citing anonymous concerns about exposure to organized criminal influence, requesting financial disclosure, medical records, school records, and a home assessment. Kemi read it 3 times standing in her kitchen. Then she put the children in front of a cartoon, walked into the bathroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the tub with her hands pressed flat against her knees, breathing the way she taught trauma patients to breathe when their bodies wanted to panic and their minds needed to stay clear. She'd survived a wedding that turned into a public humiliation. She'd survived giving birth to triplets alone, 4 hours from anyone who loved her. She did not have room, in the life she'd built, for falling apart. So she didn't. Instead, she got angry. Clean, useful, focused anger. The kind that organizes rather than destroys. She called Do-hyun directly for the first time in 2 years. He picked up before the second ring, as though he'd been holding the phone for months waiting for exactly this call. "I know," he said, before she spoke a single word. "Then you know this was never about protecting anyone," Kemi said. "Someone used my children to get to you, and I need you to understand something, Do-hyun, because I don't think you've ever once in your life had to understand this. I am not asking you to fix this for me. I am telling you that you broke something 2 years ago, and it is still breaking things, and if you have any decency left in you, you will find out exactly what it costs to stop it." Silence on the line, long enough that she almost thought the call had dropped. "Say what you need," he finally said. "I need every thread connecting your world to theirs severed. Not hidden, not managed. Severed. If there's a single account, a single associate, a single anything that a family court can point to and say this child's father is dangerous, I need it gone. Not for you, for them. That's the entire organization, Kemi. I know exactly what it is," she said. "You spent 2 years learning to stay away because I asked you to. Now I'm asking you to do the one thing you've never done for anyone in your entire life. Choose something over the thing that makes you powerful." The line went quiet again. When he spoke, his voice had lost the flatness she remembered from the marble floor 2 years earlier. "I don't know if I know how." "Then it's time you learned," Kemi said. "Because your daughter wears a bracelet. Elder Bake made her out of fishing line, because she doesn't have anything with her father's name on it. And someday, she's going to ask why. And I would like, for once, for the answer to make me proud of you, instead of ashamed of myself, forever loving you." She hung up before he could respond. That phone call, more than anything Do-hyun had done in the 2 years prior, became the moment everything after it hinged on. The article ran 3 days later. Seoul crime figures' hidden family uncovered. It didn't name Kemi outright, but it included enough. A blurred photograph of the park, a description of a foreign-born nurse residing in Busan, references to 3 unregistered children, that within 48 hours, someone at Kemi's clinic recognized her from the description and asked, in the break room, in front of colleagues, whether the story was about her. She didn't deny it. She also didn't explain it. She finished her shift, drove home, and found Toby crying in the apartment stairwell because another parent from the building, having read the article on a community forum, had told her own child not to play with the mafia kids anymore. That was the night Kemi finally allowed herself to break. Just slightly. Just once. Not in front of the children. She waited until they were asleep, until Elder Beck had gone back to his own apartment down the hall, and she sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the refrigerator and let herself cry the way she hadn't cried since the bus terminal bathroom 2 years earlier. Elder Beck found her there an hour later, having forgotten his reading glasses, and come back for them. He didn't say anything wise. He just sat down on the floor next to her, an old man's knees protesting the whole way down, and stayed there until she stopped. I built all of this so they'd never have to feel what I felt, Kemi said eventually, and it took one photograph to undo it. It took one photograph to reveal it, Elder Beck said. What you built is still standing. A strong wind found a crack. That's not the same as a house falling down. She didn't fully believe him that night. But she went to sleep, and in the morning, the children were still hers, still safe, still calling an old fisherman Papa, with the same unshaken certainty they always had, and something in her steadied enough to keep going. The custody inquiry, meanwhile, moved forward exactly as Attorney Yang had designed it to. A social worker was assigned. A home visit was scheduled. Kemi's employment, income, and living situation were placed under formal review, all under the procedural language of child welfare, all funded, quietly, by a woman 6 months pregnant who told herself every night that she was protecting her own child and nothing more. Do-hyun spent the 6 weeks after Kemi's phone call doing something no rival organization, no rival family, and no law enforcement agency in 15 years had ever managed to accomplish. He dismantled himself. He didn't do it with speeches. He did it the way he'd built everything else, methodically, in silence, one transaction at a time. He transferred 3 of his 5 district operations to subordinate leaders, with no traceable connection to the Kang name. He dissolved the shell companies that had laundered his family's business for 2 generations. He signed over the casino interests his grandfather had originally built the family's fortune on. Director Oh Se-jin watched, alarmed, as the empire's foundation came apart under his employer's own hands. You're destroying everything your family spent 40 years building. I'm returning it to the ground, Do-hyun said. It should never have grown the way it did in the first place. He didn't stop at dissolution. He redirected. He created an irrevocable education trust in the names of Junho, Toby, and Io, full tuition, graduate school, a living stipend until they turned 30, structured so thoroughly that no future legal action, from any direction, could ever touch it. He established a medical fund. He arranged, through channels so indirect that even Elder Bake would never learn the source, a modest pension that would let the old fisherman stop worrying about money for the rest of his life. He was converting 15 years of power into something he could never personally claim credit for, and for the first time since he was 9 years old, watching his father walk out a door and never come back, that felt like the only thing he'd ever done that meant something. When attorney Yang's custody filing reached its scheduled hearing date, Do-hyun didn't send lawyers. He went in person, alone, and requested a private meeting with the presiding family court judge and Kemi's assigned social worker before proceedings began. He placed a drive on the table, 15 years of financial records, every account, every transaction, every name. "I'm not here to fight the inquiry," he said. "I'm here to end it. Everything you find on that drive proves I have no active organizational ties left to threaten anyone. What I'd ask, respectfully, is that the court also examine who filed the original tip and why." The social worker, a methodical woman named Miss Kwan, who had seen every kind of family and crisis in her 19 years on the job, studied him for a long moment. "You understand what you're handing us?" "I understand what I'm handing back," Do-hyun said. "It was never mine to keep in the first place. It took the court investigators 4 days to trace the original anonymous tip back to the paralegal's phone, and from there to attorney Yang, and from there to a retainer paid from an account linked to Yoo Ji-soo. Ji-soo learned the investigation had turned toward her while sitting in her own obstetrician's waiting room, 7 months pregnant, reading a news alert on her phone about the very story she had engineered. She understood, with the particular clarity that comes only after it's too late, that she had spent months trying to protect a future for her child by destroying the foundation of 3 other children's lives, and that the only person who would ultimately pay for that decision was herself. She didn't fight the exposure. When investigators contacted her, she confirmed everything: the private investigator, the anonymous tip, the retainer, even the journalist packet, though she'd used an intermediary for that final piece, specifically so it couldn't be traced back directly. She told Miss Kwan, in a recorded statement that would later become part of the court's official closure of the inquiry, that she had acted out of fear, not malice, though she understood those two things had produced the same damage, regardless of which one she called it. The custody inquiry was formally closed 9 days later. No press conference. No public statement. Just a quiet procedural notation in a family court filing system, closing a case that had, for 6 weeks, threatened to take Kemi's children away from the only stability they'd ever known. 3 days after the closure, Kemi received a message through director Oh Se-jin. Do-hyun wanted to speak with her. No conditions. No agenda. She could choose the place. She chose the pier near Elder Beck's old fishing dock, the place where she used to walk in the first exhausted months after the triplets were born, when sleep felt like a rumor and the ocean air was the only thing that made her feel like a person, instead of just a set of functions keeping 3 infants alive. He came alone. No security, no driver waiting nearby, just a man in a plain coat standing at the edge of a dock in Busan, looking, for the first time since she'd known him, uncertain of his own footing. They stood several feet apart. The tide moved in slowly behind them. "My father left when I was 9, Do-hyun said, without preamble, because he'd rehearsed this on the drive down and knew if he waited for an opening, he'd lose his nerve entirely. He didn't fight, didn't explain. He was just gone, and my mother told me the family was better off without people who chose themselves over us. I spent the rest of my life making sure nobody could choose to leave me, because I built systems where leaving cost too much. I confused control with love. I thought if I made you need me enough, you'd never look at me the way my father's absence made me look at him. You made me kneel on a floor in front of the woman replacing me," Kemi said. "Not cruelly, just true. I know, and you watched. I know that too." His voice caught slightly. the first real crack she'd heard in it, in the 3 years she'd known him. I've replayed that night more times than I can count, and every single time, the version of me in my head does something different, stops it, says something. In 2 years, I've never once managed to actually change what happened, because it already happened, and I don't get to rewrite it just because I finally understand what it cost. Kemi looked at him for a long moment, not with the caution she used to carry around him, not with calculation, but with something closer to the assessment she gave patients when she needed to know, clinically, honestly, what she was actually dealing with. You dismantled everything, she said. Yes. Why? You told me to. I told you to choose, she said. I didn't think you'd actually do it. Neither did I, he admitted. Until I did it. And it was the only decision I've made in 15 years that didn't feel like it cost me something. It felt like putting something down I never should have been carrying. They stood in silence for a while, the ocean doing what oceans do, indifferent and steady. I won't promise you a place in their lives, Kemi finally said. That's not mine to give away for them. But I won't lie to them either. When they're old enough to ask, and they will ask, Do-hyun, children always ask, I'll tell them the truth, all of it, the kneeling and the 2 years of silence, and everything you did after, and they'll decide, themselves, what to do with that truth. That's more than I have any right to, Do-hyun said. Yes, Kemi said, it is. He reached into his coat and produced a single sheet of paper, folded twice, a formal, notarized renunciation of any future custody claim, alongside documentation of the trusts he'd established. He handed it to her without ceremony. I don't want to complicate their world, he said. I just want them to have every resource I can give them, without ever having to give me anything back for it. If someday, when they're older, they want to know who I am, I'd like that chance. Not as their father, I haven't earned that, just as someone who tried, eventually, to be less of what I was. Kemi folded the paper and held it against her chest for a moment, before putting it away. Ayo wears a bracelet Elder Back made her out of fishing line, she said. She tells everyone it's her lucky bracelet. Do-hyun closed his eyes briefly. It was such a small detail. It was somehow the only gift he needed. A year later, Junho has started primary school, and true to form, he's already organized the other children into an elaborate imaginary shipping company he insists on running, complete with rules only he fully understands. His teacher describes him as a natural leader with an unusually specific vocabulary for a 6-year-old. Kemi laughs every time she hears it, though she never explains why. Toby climbs everything. He talks to strangers with a fearlessness that gives Kemi mild heart palpitations at every playground they visit. He has decided he wants to be a fisherman, like Elder Bake when he grows up, and spends most weekends helping, with tasks that mostly involve getting in the way and being indulged anyway. Ayo draws, quiet, careful drawings of the harbor, of boats, of her brothers mid-argument. She still wears the fishing line bracelet on her left wrist, though it's been replaced twice as she's outgrown it. Always rebuilt by the same patient hands. Elder Back turned 73 this year. He walks the children to school most mornings. Slower now, but no less steady. He still cooks too much rice on purpose. He is, by every measure that matters to those 3 children, Papa. And nothing about the last year has changed that, and nothing about the years ahead is expected to either. Kemi finished her recertification and now runs the community clinic's outreach program full-time. She sleeps 8 hours most nights. She has a small garden on her balcony where she grows peppers and greens she can't easily find in Busan markets. And she has started, slowly, to let herself imagine a future that isn't only about survival. Yoo Ji-soo gave birth to a son the same season the custody inquiry closed. She and Do-hyun separated quietly in the months that followed, not out of cruelty, but because both of them recognized, without needing to say it aloud, that whatever had existed between them had never been built on anything solid enough to survive contact with the truth. She raises her son now with more honesty than she was ever raised with herself, and Do-hyun, to his credit, provides for that child with the same quiet, unclaimed generosity he extends to the triplets. And Do-hyun himself has become something he never expected to be, unremarkable. He runs a small, legitimate logistics consultancy now, nothing like the empire his family built over 2 generations. He lives modestly. He receives quarterly updates through director Oh Se-jin, photographs, school reports, the occasional drawing Io insists on including, though she doesn't know who it's for. Twice a year, always on their birthday and always at Christmas, an unmarked package arrives at Kemi's apartment. No note, no return address. Inside, always, something small and specific. A book, Junho mentioned once in an offhand comment, Do-hyun somehow heard about. Art supplies for Io, a fishing lure, hand-carved, for Toby. Kemi has never told the children where these come from. She's decided that's a truth for later, for whenever they're ready to ask the harder questions about where they came from and why. On the last Tuesday of this story, the triplets walked to school with Elder Baek, same as always. Jungho runs ahead, narrating something to nobody in particular. Toby holds the old man's hand, mostly because he likes the routine, not because he needs the support. Io skips, her bracelet catching the morning light. 30 meters back, on the other side of the street, a man in a plain coat walks the same route, at the same pace, the same way he has, unannounced and unacknowledged, twice a month for the past year. He doesn't call out. He doesn't cross the street. He knows the crossing guard's schedule by now, knows which storefront the children like to look in, knows exactly how long it takes Ao to stop and examine something interesting on the sidewalk before catching up to her brothers. He has never touched any of it. He has only ever watched, from precisely the distance he earned. Some men rebuild what they broke and reclaim their place at the center of it. Kang Do-hyun earned something smaller and, in its own way, harder, the right to watch from 30 meters away, and to be grateful for even that. If this story stayed with you, if you felt that dock scene, if you're still thinking about a fishing line bracelet on a 2-year-old's wrist, let me know in the comments. And tell me honestly, was walking away and staying away the bravest thing Do-hyun ever did, or should he have fought harder to earn a place inside that family, instead of settling for the edge of it? I'll read the best answers next time. Until then, take care of yourselves.